everybody. Today we are here for another Galactic Center diary entry. This is with Mak Jagger of Mak Jagger Tarot. I'm really excited to have you do this because your chart is so like fucking lit up when it comes to this. It really is. And she has given permission for me to post a picture of her chart. It'll be linked to this video so you can take a look at it as well if you want to. So you can see visually see what I'm talking about. But yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
So okay, so in your chart I have it, I'm gonna be looking in a bunch of different directions here at the computer at your chart and then at my questions on this other iPad. I just want to, so it doesn't look like I'm spacing out and not focused. Okay, so you have Uranus in Sagittarius. It's at 22 degrees 44 minutes. It's in your fourth house and it's conjunct your IC, and both of these are conjunct the Galactic Center. So with Uranus conjunct the GC, do you feel like you get sparks of information from things, beings, etc., outside of yourself? Really, this could even be coming from your higher self on the other side in another realm. And I mentioned that because Uranus is so close to your IC, which is like the core of your being in this lifetime. So it does make sense to me that perhaps the core of your being so connected to the GC might really tap you into like your higher self on the other side. You also feel like you get sparks of intuition as well. And these would be like fast things, like where they come to you quickly. And it's like,
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting to think about this in context of the Galactic Center, which I'm like is very new to me. I do, I work as an intuitive. That is my main occupation. And I've been learning also a lot more about human design, which I'm not sure if that's something that you're familiar with, but in human design, every person has like an authority, which is essentially like the core where you make your decisions. And I have splenic authority, and my understanding of splenic authority, which is to say from my spleen, is that my truth, my inner knowing is immediate, and it's immediate. You either receive it or you don't receive it. And if you don't receive it, there's no way to recreate it. It is just like you get this truth and you have to be present with it or else you've lost it essentially. So that has been like really big a wake up call for me to like be really more conscious and aware of those downloads and receiving those downloads. One thing that I've shared with you that I think is really interesting that I would have never discovered had we not had this discussion about this is that one of my dear friends who's also a professional intuitive has her Uranus placement at 22 degrees of Sagittarius, which I thought was just so interesting because there's a lot of deep spiritual connection between the two of us. But I mean, I definitely think I do get like sparks of intuition and knowing, but it also is requisite that I'm present with myself to be able to like see and interpret that, which is probably where the problems for me lie, is like not always being, fully present to receive those downloads of insight. And then like having to deal with consequences later if I don't, heed the wisdom that I'm receiving in those moments.
That makes sense. Do you also feel like you need to like write it down almost or something kind of like that?
Yeah, I'm not the biggest note taker. I'm not the biggest write it down kind of gal. I have become more so in the recent past. I have been using the notes app like more frequently, but like it's never been, I'm not one to like, I'm not a big documenter of things like this. I often wonder, like, I think I have a good memory and I think I remember a lot of things, but maybe I don't, maybe there's that maybe I do have insights that I forget, because how would I know if I'm not documenting them? But no, I've never been one to collect information in that way. That's not really like something I've done that I make a habit out
of. Okay. I was just curious. Sometimes the writing things down or taking some kind of a note of some kind, even if it's like a voice memo or something, can be helpful because Uranus is so fast. Like it's
okay, that makes sense.
And it lights up quickly, and then it And with the GC already kind of having like this, I think it has like a Uranian, a Neptunian, and a Plutonian flavor to it.
Okay.
It seems like the Uranus thing there, like, really is electric, and it's fast. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be for me. I also recently was diagnosed with ADHD. And so, coming to terms with like how fast my brain actually does move and how fast I am processing information has been like kind of one of the bigger challenges I've been working through this year and in the recent past. And I do think it is, yeah, there's something about the speed of it that almost makes it overwhelming, maybe would be a word that I would use to describe my experience. But then again, like, I do intuitive work professionally. So it is like when I'm channeling it for the purpose of work, then it's just as organic, it's very natural. But like just in the course of everyday living, it's I guess I don't maybe even know, because I don't know anything outside of my own experience too. Like maybe I don't register how much assistance I get from it on a regular basis, if that makes sense. And maybe I don't recognize that.
it's really interesting what you just said, because in my questions for you, I mentioned something about how, let me get to that one since you already kind of touched on this.
Okay.
Okay. So I mentioned that you have and I sent it to you in the notes. I mentioned that you have a trine to the Galactic Center. The Uranus and the GC, and the IC are trine your Jupiter retrograde.
Got it. Okay.
In the 8th house.
Yeah.
And the 8th house, I mean, the 8th house deals with a lot of things, right? It's a lot of things, but one of the things is like other people. I think of it as like a house of like other people's resources and values, also like other people's like a deep soul merging that can happen with other people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it's and while this generally is thought of like in romantic relationships, I could just see it also qualifying like with the work that you do. I could see this qualifying there. I could, especially with like the kind of occultish nature to it, right? Because it's how the is rather, and even
the financial exchange too, maybe like something about that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. The other people's money and shit. Yes. But the trine, it is my theory that that trines to the GC or to planets conjunct the GC is how the stuff from the GC comes down to Earth, how you're able to bring it down to Earth and make it real. And while that sounds weird because we're talking about the 8th house, the 8th house is not the most down to Earth house, but in the context of what other things like the 8th house can represent, this kind of does make sense, because you're kind of saying that like when you work, right, in the context of like being with a client, it comes out more easily, or you're able to do something with it, almost make it utilize it, make it tangible, whatever. So I do you feel like that might be like that fits like that might be where it's able to be translated the easiest, if you will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another thing that a thought that I had recently, and then I was like looking over your questions today, and I was like, oh, that kind of applies to this, is sometimes if I'm doing magic work, if I don't have really, really clear intentions with it, if it's just a little bit more loosey-goosey, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, I find it actually affects people around me more directly than it does me. Like a lot of times I feel like my money spells hit my friends and family. And
this could fit too.
in a way that like is beneficial to me, in a sense of like that they're like, it makes them more generous with me, but like I almost feel like they are more sometimes the recipients of those workings in a kind of indirect way.
That makes sense. I could totally see how that could happen here, especially with like the 8th house being magic too.
Yeah, and Jupiter, and it's my Jupiter, is at 29 degrees, which I've always been kind of interested in, like what having it at that sort of anaretic degree, how that sort of makes any sort of impact on it. I don't know. It's just something I've kind of been curious about when I look at my chart.
This is my opinion on that. I know that other people have other opinions on this. This is my opinion on that.
Sure.
on this particular degree, so the planet is like, I think of it as like the planet has a lot of like push to want to finalize Aries energy, if you will.
That makes
but
sense.
But it's also tired.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's also tired. It has that push. It has that push. And because this is retrograde, that push is really super internal.
Mm-hmm.
But it is kind of tired. Like it just wants to be done with that.
Yeah.
That sun energy.
Yeah, that makes sense to me in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing I'm going to ask you about, I'm going to jump back to Uranus for just a second.
Yeah, of course.
Conjunct the GC. Okay. So the notion of fragmentation.
Okay.
Okay. And this is a Uranian thing as it is. Fragmentation and fracturing is.
Mm-hmm.
But with this conjunct the GC, it does seem like it could be intensified.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you feel like there is a lot of fragmentation or fracturing that you've had to do or have done at the core of your being throughout your life? Do you feel like there have ever been parts of you that have been broken off either intentionally or unintentionally?
Yeah, I mean, I that's one that I like wanted to kind of talk with you more about, because I think yes, I think the answer is yes, but I'm not exactly sure how to pinpoint it. Do you think it would be helpful for me to like at least start from like a fourth house perspective, since that's where my Uranus is? Or is this like really something that like, I guess I'm trying to kind of localize that a little bit more so I can see the patterning and then see where that applies in a broader sense of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you could start with Uranus. I feel like they're kind of, because like I mentioned, like the GC kind of has an affinity for like Uranus energy as it is. It just feels like it kind of amplifies that.
Got it. Okay.
Let me ask it this way.
Okay.
Because I'm wondering if it actually could come through more this way. When you're doing any kind of intuiting for anybody, or even pulling cards or doing magical work or what have you, or even Akashic records, sorts of, whatever, any kind of, do you have to kind of, I want to like fragment, like, is it fully you? And it's not the same thing as channel. It's not quite the same thing as channeling, but it's like having to fracture part of you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That, yes, 1000%. I don't feel present really. I mean, there are moments of my presence in those experiences, but for the most part, I do feel like a part of myself is largely sort of turned off for that experience. And then it becomes more apparent in the Akashic records, because when I'm speaking to someone, I'm channeling from their masters, teachers, and loved ones. And so when I do need to say something to them directly, I'll often preface that, okay, this is me talking to you right now. Like, and if I don't say that, then you can kind of just assume that anything I'm saying is from the masters, teachers, and loved ones. But I do find a need to, like, if I'm going to make a statement independently of the records, then I need to like clarify that. When I'm doing other types of work, like just my standard tarot readings, it is sort of this amalgamation of me and, whatever forces that are at play that allow me to read the cards. But yeah, a lot of my own like humanity is sort of, I guess, fractured off in a sense of like, a lot of times I get questions around, oh, this work must be so exhausting to you. Like, are you so tired at the end of the day? How can you do this many readings? And I'm like, actually, no, I'm not. Like it almost feels like I'm like physically, like the container of my body is like borrowing another energy source, if that makes sense, like for the experience. And then when I'm done, it's not happening anymore.
Yes, it does. And I feel like that fits here too. Like,
okay. Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense to me now. I kind of, okay. Yes.
I probably should have asked that a little differently in the.
That's okay. No, I figured we would just discuss it because I know the answer. I knew the answer was yes. I just wasn't really sure how to like contextualize where that was happening. in the context of like, but it does make sense because it's a question. It's probably the number one question I get from people is like, how are you not so drained and exhausted at the end of this? And it's because it doesn't really feel like it's using my energy. It's like another energy source is inhabiting me almost is the only way I could describe it, which sounds weird, but it's really not.
No, it's not, especially not in the context of this.
Okay.
It's really, really not. And it's, my guess is if you didn't have Uranus conjunct the GC, if that wasn't trying Jupiter like that, I think you might get more.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that because my friend who has this exact same Uranus placement doesn't have that experience. Like she does, and I don't want to like speak for her, but from things that she shared to me, she does get very drained by doing readings for people.
Is her Jupiter also trying like that?
I mean, I don't have her chart in front of me, but I don't think so.
Because I think it might be like you've got that ease of also being able to bring it down to earth.
Got it. Yeah.
I feel like both of those it's a nice thing in tandem that you have going on for what.
Sure. Helpful to know. Yeah. Cool.
But you can probably really tap into a whole bunch of shit when you
yeah,
like, even without really trying.
Yeah, it's a very low. I mean, like it's very, I don't want to say it's not low effort, but it is kind of low effort. I mean, like it has to be, I think, to be able to do the volume of work that I do. It doesn't require much for me to tap into that place that I need to be in to do the work that I'm doing. I can kind of pretty much walk off the street from any situation and sit down and do the work. So that is part of why I do this work, is because it is so accessible to me in that way. I can access it without having to put myself through a lot of strain to get there, if that makes sense.
It does. It definitely does. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to ask is about Chiron.
Okay.
It's at 2817 Gemini. It is in your 10th house, and it is conjunct the Galactic anti-center.
Okay.
Now, just in case anybody isn't aware of what that is, the Galactic anti-center is an area of the sky. It's a much calmer area of the sky than the GC. It's got a big ass bright star in the front of it that kind of blinds it from view, in a sense, and it's also got like space dust covering it. So it's a little cloudier, if you will, and just not quite as able to be seen. So I do wonder about Chiron in your chart, and I've got the same thing going on in my own Chiron conjunct the anti-center. Do you feel like you feel Chiron's wounding all of the time?
That's such a good question, and I really I don't think that I do. I don't know. I don't know. Just a second, my friend is coming in, and I don't think that I do. And I never really kind of, I think, understood why I didn't until understanding more about this. So I don't think that I have the full Chiron experience, if that makes sense, but I've never really understood why. So yeah, I would say that's probably something to tap in on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was just curious because I was going to say, if you came back saying like, oh no, I feel, do you ever feel like it gets shocked?
Yes. Yeah. In the sense of like, I don't really like, yes, I think it does, in the sense of like, I don't always or can't always anticipate, what might be upsetting to me. I mean, maybe I don't understand Chiron even as well as I think that I do. I know it's the wounded healer, but I don't really know why or what that means, I guess, in a broader sense. Like, I understand it basically, but like, I think maybe there is a blockage around it for me. And I wonder if it is like related in some ways to this galactic anticenter placement.
It could be. It could be.
Because it's in my 10th house, so in that having, somewhat of a public facing element of my business, is very personal to me. And I don't have many qualms about that, but I've definitely had things take me by surprise that were upsetting in a way that I wasn't anticipating to be, I guess, or
kind of feel like it came out of nowhere.
Kind of, yeah. And it makes me a little bit more cautious of my public persona because of that potentially happening again without much, notice. Especially especially now with like Mars retrograde transiting that area of my chart. It does feel like, one of those things where I'm like, oh, I should be cautious and mindful of this a little bit more in terms of like public facing presentations of self or career, all of that. Like it is, I think also because of how personal it is to me, because my livelihood is so tied up in my public facing image, that it does feel like very deeply personal, if that makes sense. But but yes, I do think maybe that part of being comfortable with that, like having those two things being so tethered, is maybe because I don't have as much sharp, like acute awareness of my Chiron, that I can kind of like dole it out a little bit, maybe, in a sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Yes, it does. It does.
Yeah. So I think that is definitely something that this context is helpful around understanding a little bit more for me.
Good. Good. Okay, so the next one that we have is the supergalactic center, which is the black hole in the center of metacluster of galaxies, which we are a part of.
Okay.
This one is right now currently at 2 degrees Libra. It was at 1 degree Libra when you were born. So it's like right on your Mercury.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Like right there. It's also on your south node as well. I'm going to focus on Mercury more here for a second though, but it is very close to the south node as well.
Okay.
Okay. So Mercury conjunct the supergalactic center makes me think that you probably get a hell of a lot of mental downloads that you want to share outwardly with other people, since Mercury is in Libra. These downloads feel like they would come from either even further out than the galactic center. Also about compromising.
Okay.
Do you see that thumbs up on my thing?
Yeah.
Sorry, so stupid. I don't know why that fucker it keeps doing it. Sorry.
No, it popped up earlier, and it was like when I'd asked a question. It was funny because of the timing of when it popped up. I was like, oh, when did she do that? But yeah,
I have no control. It just does it.
Mercury's retrograde in Libra.
Do you feel like when you communicate with other people, because the super galactic center does seem like it would have a lot to do with relationships, does fall in Libra. I don't disagree with that. I think it does, but I also think it has a lot to do with compromise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But not necessarily like, but it's like to a degree where it's on like steroids, like where you're almost to the point where you're over compromising things that you shouldn't. And here with Mercury there, it almost feels like it could play out like, I don't know, perhaps overly bending to other people in communication.
I don't think that I personally don't think that I do that. I think that I'm pretty good at not doing that. Like I've made really strong boundaries about that. But one thing I will say that I've noticed, and I've always sort of attributed it to that very early degree Mercury and Libra, is that I find that I'm often intermediary between two people in conflict in my life. I find
Okay.
that I frequently am in that position of an intermediary between conflict between two people that I deeply care about. When they're in conflict, I feel like I'm very oftentimes very through no real, it just like feels very organic that I've just like somehow the peacemaker involved in like smoothing the communications over, and not in a way that, but not in a way that doesn't feel like that feels unhealthy. It actually feels like pretty, like very much like something I'm good at and something that I can do pretty effectively without it, because I do often in these situations care very deeply about both parties. So that's a frequent occurrence in my life in managing kind of compromises there.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's how that plays in. Maybe that is how that particular, and the relationship thing, you know, trying to,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
never sucks you in to the issues.
No, I usually do a pretty good job of staying neutral, like very just like I'm almost always just neutral mediating intermediary force that's, and through like establishing really firm boundaries, it's clear that I'm neutral and that I'm going to stay neutral. And that has
Good.
happened repeatedly throughout my life. It's a very common recurring thing.
Yeah. I have my south node right there too.
Mhm.
Not Mercury, but south node. I have definitely been that that
Yeah.
go between. Unfortunately, on my end of things, it has never felt quite as healthy. So I'm glad that it's healthy for you. I'm glad that it is, that it's
I mean, I think it is in a sense of like, I don't feel personally affected often by it. It's like I don't feel like I'm the either party is like taking advantage of the fact that I'm able to offer them that sort of that the word's coming up with service, which I don't think is the right word, but like it does feel like it's almost just like appreciated when I'm able to do that effectively in the relationships that's frequently been a sort of scenario I find myself in.
That's good. That's good that it's appreciated. I think I think that makes it all. I think that makes a lot of this probably healthier. Like you said, you know, yeah, yeah. Okay, so the last one I'm going to ask about is your moon and north node conjunct blank space
Okay.
or whatever the hell opposes the supergalactic center.
Got it.
This would be at like 2 degrees Aries, so it's like, or 2 degrees Aries now, it would have been at 1 degrees Aries when you were born. So it's right, it's between the moon and Pisces at 25, what is that, 25, 26 Pisces and the north node. Do you feel like you function best or most on your course like path kind of thing? Correct path.
Yeah.
When you just kind of do or act along with allowing yourself to just be. Now, the reason I ask it like that is because when I think of Pisces energy, right, I think of just being, right? Pisces is so fluid. It just it just is, you know, it just is.
Yeah.
Whereas Aries energy needs to, which is where your north node is, needs to act and do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when both of these, and that sounds kind of like they can't exist together, but they can, you know, it's
Yeah.
it's like a combination of just being and just doing.
Yeah, that really makes sense to me very much. Yes. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yes, I understand what you're
saying. Good. Do you feel like you function best when you allow yourself to do this?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that's why I'm at my best, is being able to be at that center, like that, like kind of the Venn diagram of the two, like doing and being, like existing in that center is very, very much where I am in my vibe, like where I'm doing well in my life.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Let me see. Yeah, I think I just rewrote that question twice. Okay, well, that's cool. Yeah, I would think that like when you just kind of, especially with your emotions, when you just kind of let them do and be what they need to be, whatever,
Yeah.
what the hell ever that might be.
Sure. Yeah. And
And
I think that's a lot of my life is sort of spent in that space, crying. Like a lot of my life is like kind of creating allowance for that to be my circumstances, is not having to like, so like I guess like like kind of defining like that space would be there, like trying to figure out what the opposite of it would be, which is like to be forced, I guess, rather than yeah.
or I think of like yeah, being forced, or even like Libra energy, right? On the opposite end can be so like trying to balance things that it either becomes imbalanced or it almost gives up. Like I kind of feel like Libra energy can be apathetic when it doesn't know how to balance.
Sure.
So it's kind of like balancing things so much, sitting around trying to weigh things so much that you don't ever do or be.
Yeah. Yeah, like kind of just letting it organically balance rather than like putting the effort into it almost, or
yeah, or even not caring so much about the balance and just kind of being and doing.
yeah, like the way I'm seeing this or feeling this is like an unstructured time where you can just kind of do both. Like
yeah,
like when I have unstructured time in my life, that's typically when I'm happiest and when the best sort of circumstances tend to manifest for me is when I have like an abundance of unstructured time. And that really hasn't felt super available to me in the years that my Saturn has been, or the years that Saturn's been transiting Capricorn and Aquarius, and like I haven't felt as much especially since Capricorn has been in my sixth house, or not Capricorn, Saturn has been in my sixth house in Aquarius. I have felt like I felt almost like a deficit of time or like a scarcity of time. And when that happens, I do feel restricted on my ability to just like sort of that do be fusion in a way that like I definitely feel better when I'm not like trying to balance doing and being with like a ticking clock, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Because that doing and being energy, especially with the Pisces influence, it doesn't, that ticking clock doesn't really, it's not really so conducive to, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Like being able to be unstructured with my time feels very key to like the doing and being space that I want to be in.
That makes sense. That definitely does. Do you have anything else that you would like to add that I did not?
I don't know, because I do wonder if part of like being more called in the last several months to like do work in the Akashic records and do work with timelines and timeline jumping, which I'm a big advocate and fan of. Do you think that there's like ties back to that with this work, and maybe that same sort of calling that I'm responding to? Do you think that maybe your calling that you're experiencing to do this research maybe is kind of on that same sort of, wavelength of like, why us? Why now? You know what I mean? Like, why are other people also that are in our lines of work also at this moment being so called to like this work? It feels big. It feels like something, you know what I mean?
It does. No, I know what you mean. It isn't something that I've actually done any research into, but I do know what you're talking about, because there does seem like there is something brewing, right? But yes, I would not be surprised for a second if somehow there were ties. Yes, I would not surprise at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think that and it's this is not necessarily my original thoughts, but things that I've heard others discussing, and things that I've also felt myself, and things that I've had conversations I've had with my friend who is also very fascinated with this, with literally said to me the other day, I'm really becoming more fascinated with like the concept of a black hole. And she's my friend that is conjunct, that has the same Uranus placement as mine. So I just get this, it's this sense that so many of us that are already enlightened, are already doing this work, already working with clients, already like in this public facing roles of esoteric work, are going deeper into understanding these void spaces, these black holes, these sort of spaces where time is more malleable than in other parts of life. And so I just, I don't know. I don't even know if that's a question so much as just like a statement, or just kind of wanting to gauge your thoughts on that.
I definitely think there probably is something to it, just kind of like the massive amounts of seeking these things, which is also very, very galactic century too. Sagittarius, the seeking, but it's like on steroids, right? Like it's wanting even more, wanting to seek even more and more and more and more and more. Yeah.
And I think there's just the ability for people to comprehend it a little bit more, including myself, to be with the expansiveness of time and kind of moving away from the limitations. And I think that's part of why I have felt such an interesting relationship to time, with Saturn sort of transiting its rulership. And particularly in my 6th house of daily activities, why time in a way has felt more restricted in a sense, and also in other ways has been felt never more expansive, in the sense of like being able to timeline jump. And part of timeline jumping essentially is a visualization of the black hole, of the void space, of antimatter, of, the space where all frequencies are turned down to 0, which does feel, more or less what this thing is, if I'm understanding it correctly. The galactic center is that void space. Unless it isn't.
No, it is. It's like, and everything in there is warped. Time is warped. Light is warped. Everything. Is,
yeah. So like essentially the process of timeline jumping is to visualize yourself into that space, and then coming out of it, and you get to choose a timeline from there. So it does feel tied deeply into this, this work being more evident for many of us at this moment in the last, couple years, has been just really bringing, I think, more tuned in people into this space for some reason. What that reason is, I'm very intimidated to even explore, but it feels pertinent and real no matter what,
I think it definitely is. And it makes me want to look more into timeline jumping.
Yeah, absolutely. If you ever want to like do another video where we talk more about that, or, if you want to talk more about it, just in any sense, I'm always down to have those discussions.
I think I would be, because that is something that I think I understand, but I think I get it, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's, essentially just a journey, like a meditation journey into that void space, so that you can like select a timeline that is your most resource self. So it all ties into my work with the Akashic Records, because when you're in the Akashic Records, your masters, teachers, and loved ones can show you the timelines that are parallel to yours, that you can move into at will, because the masters, the Akashic Records is the storage space of all possible timelines, but the ones that are further away from you, that are harder to access, aren't really relevant. So they don't really go into those as much, but you can go into the ones that are nearest to you and explore different options and alternatives. And then the way that I do timeline jumping is to tie that all in, so that you can really like have an informed choice of like what you're collapsing into.
I like that. I think that's cool. I think that's very cool. Yeah. Well, do you want to share where you? Oh, thank you. Do you want to share where you can be found?
Of course. So I'm Mak Jagger Tarot. You can find me here on the internet. Instagram is Mak Jagger Tarot. MakJaggerTarot.com is where you can find my offerings, or you can always just like look at my link in my bio on my Instagram. That's where you can find like my most updated specials and things like that. You can join my mailing list there. But yeah, Mak Jagger Tarot, that's where I'm at.
All right. And I will put that down below in the description box. So everybody go check her out. And thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to see this. And let's talk more about timeline jumping soon. I would love to chat with you about it.
That was good.
Okay, thank you, Ellie.
Thank you. I'll see all of y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.